Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the channel. If you haven't seen me before, I am Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios, and today we're going to be looking at remixing, or at least mixing, a track that we recorded many years ago. This is a band called Disenchanted. They were kind of, well, the lead singer, Hannah, her idol was Amy Lee. They wanted to be Evanescence. Now, this was quite a long time ago. This was when I said later last year that I'd be looking back at a few of these mixes with the intention of kind of correcting some of the mistakes that a younger mix engineer might make. In this case, a younger version of me, which means I can be as critical as I like. I can absolutely rip into them and they won't get particularly upset because, you know, it's me. So let's take a look at, why is that hung now? Oh, technical issues. We've been going 3 seconds. I've been what's the word? Come on. Been on for several seconds now. We've already had an issue. The capture card that I'm using was working perfectly well and has now suddenly decided it doesn't want to anymore. Awesome. So let's just fix that. There's always something goes wrong. Always, always, always. And pull it. Ding. It still thinks it's getting 1080-30. Despite the fact that there's absolutely nothing plugged into it right now. Great! I'm definitely replacing this Elgato capture card, by the way, with something completely different. Bear with me a second, but while I fix this, if anyone has any questions in the chat, feel free to fire away. I'm always happy to do Q&As while we do this kind of thing. BRB. This is exactly what happened last time. Yes, definitely getting rid of this system. So, let's do what I did last time. Hold on, folks. What I did last time was I ran XSplit on 2 completely different machines. And I've got the sound running. I know that's a thing. If I hit play, I can hear that, so you can hear that. Hi, Greg. Okay, so let's get this from the NDI output and add on here the NDI output. When you're quite ready, come on. Today would be nice. What's with the ding? Don't ding. I need it to very much not ding right now. Have I used QASA plugins for guitar? I have never heard of QASA plugins, to be honest with you. Nope, sorry, not one that I'm aware of. Why has XSplit now decided that it doesn't want to work? I spent an hour testing this before stream, would you believe? Let's just go back to something. I even did the screen capture for the thumbnail out of this. Control Alt Delete. Split end. I will officially end you. Ugh. This is what you get for trying to do something technologically clever. You get crashes and you get... That's a word, by the way. In other languages, it means... Ah! Right, so we're good, so let's try the NewTek NDI output. well, I'm gonna shut the stream down for a second, and then I'm gonna be right back. Okay. Can everybody see me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, because I can see myself, and hopefully that's probably lost me half my viewers. This is now, there's one person watching. Stream resumed. Yeah, so that's probably lost me all the viewers. The stream is continuing, apparently. Okay, well, I'll have to just wait for everybody to get back onto the stream now, I guess. But in the meantime, yes, I'll check out QASA if you reckon they're good. So what we're going to do, this is the original 2012 mix of this song. And it would seem... Let's go to stream now. Yeah. It would seem that as a recording engineer by 2012, I kind of had my methods down. Although for mixing, maybe not so much. So, let's hit play. So the other thing to notice is, this song is over 5 minutes long. Looks like there's people coming back into the stream, but yeah. So, this is the original mix, and I'm going to talk about the arrangement as well later on, because that's something I'm going to touch upon. The vocal sounds quite sandy, probably because it's over compressed. And that ride is all over the show. And it's over a minute now. It's a minute and 10. Nothing's really happened. Just gonna pause that there and just talk about those guitars, because they're supposed to be this big brutal wall of guitars, but it just sounds messy. At the time, I kind of figured that quad tracking guitars will make them sound bigger. And it really does show that unless you've got the tightest guitarist in the world, it's not really going to help. So I'm going to pause it again. When that kicked into the chorus, it didn't feel like it went anywhere. That's another thing. There was a moment there with the vocal harmony, which I suggested at the time because they hadn't done vocal harmony. I mean, these guys were 15, 16 years old. They were high school kids. They'd never been into a studio before. They'd never even thought about song arrangement before. They were just in practice rooms making sounds and hadn't thought about structure. So the vocal is above everything else, probably because it was the only way that I could think of at the time to get it to sit on top of the mix, because it should, to my ears now, be a little lower down, but the guitars should be a bit cleaner and clearer. So let's just go on a little further. So it's this second verse, same as the first, so I'm skipping ahead a little. Solo time. Just a comment from Mark Studios about the singer. Let's not bash the musicians. This is 5 years old. These guys, like I said, were high school kids. They obviously had their influences on their sleeves. And it does help that the singer in this band was a classical singer, and that was the way she sang. These guys came into the studio several times over the years and improved every time. This was the first time they came in, which is why I thought this would be a great use case of talking about how to get the mix sounding as good as we possibly can. So yeah, try not to be too harsh on the musicians, because yeah, they could have been better, but then over time they were better. And you could say the same about most bands if you listen to your first EP or your first album and you go, ooh, you know, that's just gonna happen. So that's not the focus of this video. And see, they bring this section back. No, anyway, that's quite enough of that. It's a 5-minute 15 track, so let's get into the project. So before coming to do the live stream, I've put a few hours of prep work in here. So what I've done, let's have a look. Most of the plugins that were there I don't use anymore, so they've all gone. So I've stripped this right back to DI guitars, DI bass. The vocals I've transferred into Melodyne. I'm going to need to quickly go through and work on them. Again, we were working under some serious time constraints when we recorded this. So, and this was years ago. There is no way that these guys would ever come in to re-record this. So this is an educational exercise in what to do when you've been dealt a hand. The drums we recorded originally using a custom electronic drum kit and Superior Drummer, which I don't have anymore, but I use Stephen Slate drums now. So I went through and I picked out a decent kit. One of the, I think it was the Chris Lord Algae kits that I used from, yeah, and then I changed things as needed. So one of the main things that I went through with this track and did is a lot of the feet, there were a lot of bubba, 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 and they were quite lumpy. So I went through and I fixed all these, so now they're which is much easier to do in MIDI than it is with audio, let's be honest. And if I was recording a kit that was for metal in audio and not MIDI, I would probably spend 2 or 3 days recording the drums until each part was right, rather than try and fix them like this. But seeing as though this is just a tutorial, hey, I figured that getting the arrangement to sound better would make it easier for you guys to listen past that and actually listen to the mixing elements. So if I unmono that, let's just have a listen to what we have from where it kicks in. Was it edited to modern standards? No. No, I don't edit to metronomic standards. I just don't. I went through manually, and if I could hear where there were any seriously sloppy parts, I've tightened them up, not to the grid. I've tightened them up to where it's what the drummer would have played on reflection. And it's not. Well, if you look at the MIDI notes, the drum diamonds here, none of them actually line up with the grid perfectly. So the first thing that I noticed listening to this with complete DI is I can hear the bass. The bass in the mix that we were listening to. I mean, some of the low end was there, but that's really quite a clear, ringing bell-like bass. The guitars at the start, relatively clean. The quad-tracked guitars, I decided for the new mix to pick the two best takes out of these four guitars and just use those. So one on the left, one on the right, and just forget quad tracking for this song, because there's no way, absolutely no way that I was going to get, especially on the verses with that, I was not going to get four very tight tracks unless I went back and spent days again with these guys, which is, again, not going to happen. There's a guitar lead part, which I don't know if you heard it in the mix before, but it's there throughout the entire song. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and add that in where we feel it's appropriate, but not until the basic tracks sound good. And we've got the vocals, which, as I said, I have run into Melodyne, but I have not yet processed. I just saved myself a lot of time by going through and feeding that into the machine beforehand. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spread the drums out. There's a drums part 2 that I can go, because I was using a weird Frankenstein kit at the time where I was using, I think, a Roland TD9 brain and an Alesis DM5 brain, both going into the computer at the same time, so I could have a big, massive virtual electronic drum kit. This is the kind of song, if I remember rightly, this song and another song were tracked in about a 7-hour period. So, yeah, that was the way that we used to do that. Don't really do that now. Well, we've now got the treated live room to do proper acoustic kits. Anyway, moving on. So if I hit play on the drum kit, that will all come out of one channel. So what we want to do is spread that out. So if we go to the mixer, this is something that I tend to do for every time I use Stephen Slate drums or Superior drums. I've done this in tutorials before, is I set everything to come out of its own channel. So the snare, which is unhelpfully labelled top and bottom what? They go out of 2, which is my snare. Looks like toms are going out of 3. I made these split tracks in Reaper a long time ago. So they're in an order that I usually now do hi-hats before toms, but it's not the end of the world either way. The effects I tend to send out of the output that the overheads go through, and then the rooms will go through 6. I am rushing through this bit because it's not the most interesting. Ever tried Superior Drummer 3? Not yet. I thoroughly intend to. From the reactions that I've seen from a lot of the respected producers that I look up to, it's very much going to be worth getting. So I think that's going to be on my list. Hopefully I can use it with an iLock, which is the complete opposite of what most people say, but I rely on the iLock system. Right now I'm doing this mix on my laptop in Studio B, which is to say my house, but then I would almost always, if I was doing I would always, for a professional mix, take this then to the studio, use the monitors, use the control room, check everything, tweak everything. And the ability to just bring my iLock and just plug it straight into the studio computer, transfer the project file and just hit go and be off on a much more powerful machine in a completely different room with no extra faffing about or buying everything twice. Fantastic. Anyway, I'm getting off track, so let's hit play and it should... There we go. So let's get all these tracks reset to 0 because the mix levels will be way off. Okay, so let's turn off the vocals for now. Let's just concentrate on drums and bass for a minute. In fact, let's start with bass because bass is one of my favourite things to make a great sound out of. I, being a bass player first before anything, think that it really pins a mix together. So that's the DI, which is very clear. So the first thing that I'm going to use, because we're going to do this all virtually today, is a BOD, which is essentially a Sans amp pedal. Whenever I play live, I use a Sans amp. Usually straight to the PA because admittedly I'm lazy. But what I'm looking for is quite a significant amount of drive there. Can you hear how the low end on it has become... Okay. Let's just... Okay, so you hear how it's gone from very clean yeah, this is BOD 3 by the way, which is far better than BOD 2 and sounds a lot more like a real Sans amp to me. So the level has gone down a little, but that's probably because of I did this in kind of a backwards order when I was getting this sound. I put a lot of these plugins in yesterday when I was trying to make decisions as to what to use. When I had a little bit more free time off camera to just mull and go, yeah, no, yeah. Because I didn't want you guys to have to sit there for 2 hours and wait for me to and ah about what I wanted to use. So the BOD is going into the Amplitude Ampeg SVT Classic, which to me is one of my go-to. It's one of my go-to amp heads, and it just does a thing. So it makes everything sound more aggressive. The treble's up a little, so that clang has come back. If I turn BOD off, if anything, it's made the bass sound leaner and meaner, which is not what you would expect. Most of the low end comes from the cabinet, not from the distortion, not from the head. If I was to just take... If I was to take a DI from the back of the amp, it would usually sound quite thin. So that's where the cabinets, or even virtual cabinets, become essential. Now, I'm using 2 cabinets here. You can see there are in 2 Notes Wall of Sound, which Torpedo Wall of Sound is my go-to for virtual cabinets. You may or may not know I work with 2 Notes quite a lot. The 2 cabinets that I'm using here are my own cabinets. I've captured them, I know them, I love them, these are brilliant. So, I'm using one that you can't even get yet. So the reason you see 4 is that it's left and right for both. You don't need to do it this way, you can have them pan center and just use 2. But let's just look at this first one, because this first one you can't get yet. I only captured this week, but it will be coming out very shortly, as in within the space of a week this will be available. So if you're watching this video in the future, these cabinets will be available for purchase on the Two Notes store. And this is called the Green 18. This is a Trace Elliot 18-inch cabinet. Have a listen to this. Oh. I changed something. What did I change? That wasn't supposed to change. What changed? That's weird. Those are not the microphones on that cab. That's weird. Why do I get all these really weird... There we go. There we go. The thunder on that compared to that. So if you've got an 18-inch speaker and a condenser microphone that can handle really high SPLs, if you put that condenser right at the edge of an 18-inch speaker, you get a natural full bloom that just saturates, because 18-inch speakers can't move very quickly, which means that the low end just kind of naturally compresses without me having to use a compressor unit. And so we get this. Which is really low endy compared to that. Do I like live jamming on guitar with Wall of Sound? I do. If you set Wall of Sound right with the right cabinets, there's a low enough latency on it that it works live. And depending on what you're doing, a lot of the time, if I'm jamming with someone, I happen to be jamming in a room with an amp. But if I wasn't, if I'm at home, then I'm quite happy with doing this. Right, so this is the other cabinet, by the way. So that had all the low end compression that we want, but on the bass we want to bring that high end back. So that's where I use the Bass Beast, which is a Zilla 4x10 bass cabinet with an SM57, because SM57s are great for that punchy upper mid thing. And if I hit play on this, so I've taken the volume down a couple of dB on that because it was starting to overtake the rest of the signal. If I bring the 18-inch back, so that SM57 on the 4x10 is giving me that clang, which if I turn that off, hear that clang has gone. And I like to hear that clang, especially in metal on the bass. So there we are with no EQ, no compression, just, oh, there we go. So that sounds, a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's too distorted, oh, that's too this, too that. It's all about context. I'll put the drums back in with that. Here you can hear that note coming through on the bass, but the low end just sits. The drums aren't even mixed yet. So let's focus on the drums now. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work a little bit backwards. I'm going to put a virtual tape machine from Slate on the drum group. So the overall, if you buy those impulses, can you use them in any IR loader? No, unfortunately not. The Two Notes stuff is exclusive to Torpedo's Wall of Sound, which you don't buy. You buy a cabinet for Wall of Sound, and Wall of Sound is yours. That's the deal. You buy one cabinet, you don't pay for Wall of Sound. It's there. It's technically free. It's not actually free, but if you buy one cabinet, that's €8. which is a pretty good deal, then Wall of Sound is yours. If you use a 2 notes torpedo, all the impulses you've bought, well, the captures, as you were, from 2 notes, and then you own them, you can use them in the Torpedo Cab, Torpedo Live, Torpedo Studio. Which of my IRs would I recommend for fuzzy Doom Sludge electric guitar? That's a relatively easy one. Either the Big Beast, which is a Zilla 4x12 with vintage 30s, or the Big Boy Redback, which is a Zilla Fat Boy with a Celestian Redback, which has a real baritone growl to it. I mean, I like diesel cabs, but I'm not usually a 4x12 user. Anyway, on with the mix. So if I turn the tape machine off and on, you hear how that kick drum already suddenly sounds way fatter. And the overheads suddenly jump out, and a tape machine can do so much for a mix. What I'm going to do at this point as well is I'm going to start organising my top down of the mix, which is to say I have a few things on the master bus. This is not mastering per se, this is what I would work into. So this is a very light bus compressor. This is a bit of kind of harmonic enrichment. This is stuff that just makes a mix naturally sound sweeter to my ears, and then means that I don't have to work as hard. And this is where I really rely on the Slate Everything bundle, because it just is exactly what I'm looking for. Just gonna move that phone away from that microphone. Electrical interference. So I use Slate's VBC rack, which has the SSL compressor, the Focusrite Red compressor, and a Fairchild 670 Very Mu. So I turn off the SSL compressor. Don't use it. Not on like heavy metal mixes. I know a lot of people do. I find, bless you, I find it makes my mixes a bit thin, a bit flat. Not a big fan. So let's start with the red, get the threshold up, hit the drive, and bring the high pass filter up, because that stops the kick drum from completely squashing the mix, which is my least favourite thing about bus compressors. I do not like that. So I'll make the release quite fast and the attack quite slow, and that should bring out that kick punch. Oh, and the FG Mu, I just leave completely as is. Don't touch it. The settings for me are perfect. So I'll turn the whole thing on and off. So between the two of them, it doesn't seem to be doing much, and that's good, that's fine. As we start adding elements, as we get to larger, louder points in the song, these should very gently be tickling and just keeping the level in check and just making that mix sound that little bit bigger without actually having to get any louder. The FG Mu, for me, mostly adds character. You may notice that the kick drum got fatter when we added the tape. The whole drum kit becomes leaner and meaner when I add the FG Mu, which I'll turn on and off, and the overheads pop out even more. Question from Greg: what layout is that for the plugins list on top view? So I just clicked in Reaper, and that just brings up all plugins. So I've got a big list of plugins, and then what I do is I use the filter, and I know what plugin I'm looking for, so I can just type a few letters, like VBC, and that whittles it right down, filters it. So only things with VBC in them then are available to me. So having done very little, above the mixer. Oh, that is the mixer. But you just drag the top of the mixer and make it bigger. And then suddenly your inserts and your sends are available. that's very much like the Pro Tools style. And I love it. I mean, if I'm using two screens, I undock the mixer, and then this one becomes exactly like the edit window in Pro Tools, and that goes on screen 2. And this becomes, sorry, that's the mix window, and then this is the edit window, not the other way around, dipstick. But yeah, it's just, if you make this smaller, they disappear so they're out of your way. If you drag the top of it to make them bigger, they magically appear. First time I found that, I was like, wow! That saved me so much work. Anywho, so that's already starting to sound like a pretty badass mix to me. And I've not done much. So, talking about top-down, I'm going to finish the whole top-down mix thing, because after those bus compressors, I add a bit of secret sauce. And this is something, oh, this is going to take a little while to load up. The first time you open a virtual mix rack on a session, which we will now be doing a lot, by the way. Have I ever put 1 dB on 100 Hz and 10K at the beginning of a mix? I have done in the past. I no longer do that because I'm about to do something similar in a very different way. That's, yeah, I don't mix like that, but I mix similarly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add... Shut up. That's Dropbox on the other machine telling me, you've added this, you've added that. Yeah, shut up. So I had 4 things in a row. So that's virtual channel, which is I leave on the SSL 4000 with noise reduction and leave that exactly as it is. And then the new virtual tube collection, VTC, I add all 3 of them all in a row. So what I do is I add some saturation on them all on the master bus, and I put them on console mode so they don't really distort, they just add a richness. And then I wind the mix back to about 30-something% just to get the character, but let most of that mix through. Now if I hit play, this should all make the needles go crazy. So I'll turn it on and off with the bypass. And you hear how everything just kind of sounds more lively. If I now bring the bass back in as well. That's starting to sound a bit like a beast. And we've not even added the distorted guitars or mixed the drums yet. So this is where it starts to get interesting. So we've got that snare going to a plate reverb. There's nothing on there right now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add that plate reverb in. I like to have things like reverbs and delays set up quite early on in a mix project. Kind of sets the scene for a mix project and means that then I'm not thinking about it later as the elements start to get busy, because then the tone of that reverb or delay unit or whatever it is becomes part of the sound, so my mix decisions don't get changed halfway through. So it just so happens that my favourite plate reverb, which is what I tend to use, is also the default of Verb Suite Classics. That's not laziness on my part. That, I think, is the fact that the guys at Slate Digital happen to know that the Lexicon 480's A plate is one of the best sounding plate reverbs. Not real plate, but plate reverb sounds ever. It just fits in a lot of mixes. So let's just hit play. So there we go. That's pretty big sounding snare. So what I do is I add an EQ. I'm going to add Reaper's own stock EQ after the Verb Suite and just get rid of that low end up to 200-ish Hertz. Because that means that bottom end mud from the reverb is then gone. But the sweetness in the mids and the top that adds that space is back. Cool. So that plate reverb's already adding more character to the sound. Again, still not touched any saturation on any of the individual drums, still not touched any EQ anywhere. Is the Slate bundle where it's about 15 a month? Yes, it is. This whole thing so far, apart from the Stephen Slate drums, is not included because that's a whole separate instrument. Everything that I talk about that's Slate Digital here, the whole thing, it's $15 a month. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, when I heard that Slate Digital were doing a bundle, I was in from the beginning. And then as they brought the price down and added more plugins, I've just kind of gone, yep, okay, cool, I'll do that. Yep. And I'm not using these plugins because they're cheap. I'm using them because they are genuinely the best that I can use. I mean, let's not talk about the UAD plugins because that's a whole world that I do not want to go in because it's... that's for another day. That's for another video. Anyway, let's do one of my other favourite tricks. I mean, the drum group, it's worth saying, I've sent each channel to a drum group. That's how I used to work back in 2012, and I've not taken the time here to go and do it the folder way, which is what I usually do. But it's already set, so there's no point in me going changing it now. What I want to do, yes. So I want to send the snare out to the room on 2 new channels. We don't want to hear that. What we want to do... Oh, that room is brutal. What I want to do is I want to get a gate going on the room, taking that snare input, but we want to have it as a wet dry, so we want to add more in than was originally there when the snare hits. So let's just make sure the release is right. Might need a little more. This is a great way to make a snare really boom out of a mix without having to add too much fake reverb. If you've got a really nice sounding room, what you can do is have the room go bow, 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 bow on every snare hit, and that just makes it sound youch. There we go. So I just bring up the detector until I can hear it going doof, doof, doof. And then I take the release until it's slow enough that we're not noticing it. We don't want to hear this as an effect. We want it to just be felt. Now it does sound a little bit weird at the moment that it's kind of going tss, 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 with all the hats and everything, but then the overhead should cover for a lot of that. If it's too much, we can bring the dry down a decibel or 2. No, not the dry, the wet down a decibel or 2. There we go. That's, yeah. So they were the wrong way around. So we needed more of the original signal and less of the keyed signal. Right, okay, so the routing's slightly backwards here. So the output 4 is actually overheads. Right, so that's one thing. So where are the hats? So the hats are supposed to be 11 and 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 6 is hi-hats, which is a little odd. Again, this isn't how I do this anymore. Blah, blah, blah. And then the room is 9 and 10, so that's supposed to be channel 5. Okay, so we were actually triggering the overheads, which is why that sounded weird. The intention was right. The routing was wrong. Come on. There we go. 5. So let's try that now. Okay, now that sounds absolutely explosive. Any drawbacks to not doing the folder method for the bus? Not straight off, no. It takes longer to do. You end up with problems like we just had, where the track routing can get a bit bleh. The biggest issue you have is when you want to do stems, and because they're not coming out of the master mix, they don't get printed. That can cause you a lot of inconvenience going through your project and then having to enable outputs and send to places to get stem mixes. That's the main drawback. Otherwise, they both work absolutely fine. So what we can now hear on the room, that's more like it. So without the gate, that's already a pretty explosive snare. But you hear how now that snare is coming out with a boom. If I bring that back into the rest of the kit, so let's just bring that down a bit. Because what we can do, that's almost too much, but what we can do is we can now compress the room and do a bit of mixing. We're not going to kill it, but we're going to put virtual mix rack before that gate. And what we're going to do first thing we're going to do is we're going to just even this out. We're going to use FG401 because it's a good leveling compressor. And we're really going to hit it quite hard. Okay, so without that gate now, that now sounds quite flat and lifeless. So with the gate, that's now got that boom. Now, what I'm hearing in this room is there's a bit too much of there's a kind of boxiness. It's actually higher than 259 Hertz, but that's what a real SSL desk would tell you it was. So I just want to take a couple of dB of that out and just add a tiny bit of top end there. There's quite a lot of hi-hat coming through on those overheads. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit. So I'm going to go to the mixer for the hi-hat. And we're going to take the overhead send and turn that volume down. Which is the same thing that I would do with a real drum kit. I would put kind of a gobo around the hats, or I would have slightly less loud hats like 13-inch hats or light hats, dark hats. By light I mean physically light, not heavy, and dark as in raw. Anything to take that hi-hat volume in the room down. So I'm going to do something similar by just taking the overhead volume down here, which is a nice luxury that we have in Stephen Slate drums, but in real life not so much. Okay, so let's just listen to the overheads. Ah, yeah, still got the reverb soloed. Let's just see what happens if we turn off the overheads. Okay, so the snare gets more clear without the overheads, which means we can afford to lose something out of the overheads. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim them down a bit. So this is the overheads. first thing I'm going to do is give them a bit of New York, and I'm going to push it quite hard. I'm going to high pass it. This should bring a lot of liveliness out of the overheads, because what we want is we want the character of the cymbals like that, but we don't want them to muddy the rest of the mix up or be too piercing at the top, which is what a lot of people, including a younger me, would have done, was just crank the EQ on the top. So if I turn this off, you see how, as much as they sound like almost reasonable overheads, if we turn this on, the overheads come to the front, but don't get muddy. Let's see how they sound with the rest of the kit. Let's turn that snare off for a second. Okay, so we are relying on that snare mic quite a bit, but what we can do, I'd like to hear a real crack on the snare. I like the choice of snare that we have there, so we're going to just solo this with the close mic for a second. Not something that I would recommend on its own without thinking about the rest of the mix. What I've done is I've listened to the whole kit with the snare, and I've now decided in my mind I need a little more low end in the snare, quite a bit more of that wiry snare top from 10k upwards. I've decided that now, and let's see if I can also use FG76 to get a bit more oomph. Yeah, so that's given us a little more punch. And then let's use the Neve EQ. 110Hz, just a little bit. See, on its own, this snare sounds a little tubby, but in the mix, it seemed to hold that low mid-range down. I used to make a big mistake of listening to close mics and going, oh, well, that sounds tubby, we should get rid of it, and then going back to the full mix and going, well, where's it gone? So what I want is to add some of this top. There's that top. So let's bring that back to the kit. Yeah. Let's turn this kick into more of a metal kick, shall we? So let's use Virtual Mix Rack again. That's pretty metal, but we really want to metal it. And what I want to do, firstly, is use FG401 to get it under control, because it's a little bit all over the place in terms of levels. So I want quite a fast release. Slow attack to let that click through. And just add in a little bit of makeup gain there. Just make it a little harsher so it's really evening things out. And then I want to use an SSL EQ, and this is where I do the whole Chris Lord LG craziness thing. So I'm adding quite a lot of low end around the 200 region. It's not at 200 Hz, it's a shelf that starts there, so it's more like 100, 150 Hz. I like to go up to about 4K and just crank. Oh. Okay, so this kick already had quite an emphasised low end there, so if I just add a little ultra top in there now, and listen to that in context to the mix. So, there we go. The high mid wanted to be higher in this case. If it was a rock track, that 3 or 4K hertz click is quite nice. I've just brought that up into the 6K region by the look of it. Okay, so if anything, that kick's just too loud now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it down. Tonally it's right. I'm going to bring it far too low. I'm going to hit play and then I'm going to drag that fader up until I'm happy. Cool. Let's look at that BBC rack. Barely twitching. Still where we want it. Good. Let's just see if we can get a little more something out of this snare. I'm going to use the Hollywood right at the end. Yeah, and then let's just see what happens if I add a bit more high mid into that snare, just a little. Oh yes, that 1 dB, that 1 dB at 4.8 kilohertz there has just brought the snare wires out a little. I didn't go crazy with it, but listen what happens if I turn that off. And to go too far. So that's too far. So if I go from too far back to just right, that's the kind of way that I like to work quite often. Is I have something in mind that I'd like to hear now. I find the tool that will get me there. I go too far and then I bring it back until I can't hear it anymore. And then that's probably about right. What do I think about S-Gear? S-Gear's fine, I guess. It doesn't do what I want it to do. That doesn't mean it's bad, but like there are a lot of real life guitar amps that I don't like, not because they're bad, but because they don't do what I want them to do. It's the same kind of thing. I think S-Gear is a competent guitar amp, and I mean, hey, the fact that it's included means if you don't have anything of that caliber, then suddenly you do. I mean, for my experience, like a lot of people still use the Poulan LePou the amps, and they're out of date now. That's my opinion. I was using, on this mix actually, in 2012, I was using LePou cabs, and they've not been updated since. Monsieur Poulan was working on a whole new algorithm, a whole new set of amps, and they never got released. So the fact that the LePou stuff is free is the only reason that most people use them now, I think. I use the Thermionic stuff. It's not pretty, but it sounds the most like the amps that I'm trying to use. Yeah, LePou's meant to be updating them, but he was meant to be updating them 3 or 4 years ago. They've just not been that way, probably because he's a busy person with a real life job that isn't that, which is quite a shame. Recently I bought TSE Audio's X50 and I've been up and downing with that. Sometimes it's perfect, sometimes it's not. Sometimes Thermionic's 5150s sound better depending on the situation. To me, like the X50s sounds less realistic but more hyped. It sounds more pleasing to the ear, but it doesn't sound like an actual 5150. But to a lot of people, that's fine. I mean, because they don't know any different. I've used Mark 1, Mark 2, PV5150s, and what I like them for isn't what a lot of people like them for. I like them because you can wind your guitar volume back to about 2 and get a clean sound. Like clean, and then with the same volume knob get right the way to roaring, chugging distortion. A lot of metal guys have probably never done that because their interfaces can't go clean enough because they're trying to replicate an amp that can do something like 160 decibels of preamp gain or something stupid. Anyway, we're digressing, so let's listen to this kit one more time, with the bass in context. Okay, so that, in context with the bass, I can now hear that that room isn't coming out enough. I really want that. So I might just add an EQ on the gate, just a stock EQ, and see if I can find that. Yes. Right, so now I'm hearing, now that I've brought that out, the hi-hats have that low in them that I just want to duck out a little. Just doing that a little, just to take out a bit of that that's going to take up some of the mix that would otherwise be taken. So I'm pushing my overheads above 0, which is something I very rarely do, but I'm going to go back into this Stephen Slate drums again and just take those hi-hats down in the overheads one more time. Which is going to give me a larger than life overhead sound, kind of like Black Album Metallica type, where they would have closed mic'd every cymbal. So this is giving me a very similar thing. Oh, Andrew7 says you can switch IRs in S-Gear. Most of the time the trouble's with the default IR. That's fair enough. If you're using impulse responses as stock impulses, I recommend the Celestion Plus impulse responses. I'm going to be doing another demo video on those. Tried to notch 5K on drums. No. If I'm having to notch 5K on drums, something's gone wrong in the mix somewhere. Let's have a look at that EQ again. So I'm actually pushing 5K on the room because the room would have been recorded with ribbons which don't have a tight tuned emphasized 5K ring already. But on the overheads, I'm not pushing any high end at all. That's the trick. A lot of guys scoop so much low end out of the overheads that they then push the volume, which means that 5K region on your overheads, your small diaphragm condensers, which have the tuned capsules that have that spike around 5K, bring that out. I'm not doing that. And on the room mics, which don't have that emphasized push, I am doing that. And the way that I'm doing that is I'm using my ears and my education of what I'm hearing and what it is that I'm trying to achieve. If these were microphones that already had quite a harsh resonance around 5K, I would definitely either notch that out or just not push it in that case. In this case, it's not there and I want it, so it comes out. And on the kick, that 6K that I'm pushing again and not notching out, it's what I want to hear on this particular drum. Okay, so I brought the bass up a bit there because there was room for it, because I've taken a little bit of the hats out, the snares popping through. Let's just go to a tom section. Let's just make the toms a little larger than life. So what I do with the toms, let's use the Virtual Tube London because it doesn't distort really. I just want to add a little bit of roundness on the bottom end. Let's go down to 140-ish hertz. Again, on the SSL, it's a shelf, so it's really only going to affect 100 hertz and below, and a little bit up to 142. I want to take that up a bit, and I want to add quite a lot of high end on the top of the toms. I just want them to do that classic doo thing. There we go. Simple. I knew which EQ I wanted to use. The toms are probably a little loud now, but... Okay, so that 5K there's a little much. And I can just hear a sizzle in the hats that I want to get rid of. Which was at, it turns out, 1.6K. And that's only gone down 3 dB, so that's now at 70% of what it was. Another subscriber. Hello. Barry Mulder is a subscriber. Okay, so on we go. So we've got our drums, we've got our bass. Let's just keep on the theme that we've done so far, which is to look at the heavy section. So what I decided to do, let's just bring one of these guitars. I listened to all 4 of these guitars before we went live, and I made the decision that 2 of them were the best played, and this is one of them. It's not perfect, but out of the 4 of them, it's the best that we had. Now, originally I was using the Lapua dual rectifiers into static impulse responses, and it sounded flat, really flat. So what I decided was to use a JCM 800 on one side, with the gain not nearly as high as you would think. Have a listen to this. So this is the Marshland 800 from Thermionic, which is a JCM 800. And I picked for the cabinets in Wall of Sound, what did I pick? The Big Boy Neo, which, again, I don't think it's out yet, but it'll be out this week if it's not already out. And that's using an SM57 just off center on a Celestine Creamback Neo, which has that real beastness. And then the big beast is the 4x12 with vintage 30s, which I've put a 421 right in the middle of the speaker and blend the 2 together. And that sounds a little bit ratty. But here's the thing, it's a metal track, but if I turn the gain up too high, listen. That detail's gone now, it's gone to hell. If I turn the gain back below 12 o'clock, did I have to pay for my own cabs in Wall of Sound? Now that would be funny. I'm not supposed to talk about a lot of the creation process because there's an NDA and all that kind of thing, but one thing I don't mind saying is that at some point when the capture's all done, I have to then test it to make sure it sounds right. I mean, obviously, you know, you want to test your own creations, so I get given a copy to make sure it's right before it goes out on sale. And here's the proof in the pudding. So just to show you, this is the 421 only on the Big Beast. Which has that really kind of dry, really biting sound that you would expect out of a 421. And then this is the Neo. Which, again, on its own, is too dark, too chewy, too kind of crunchy, doesn't have the detail, but that's why one of the classic combinations is an SM57 and a 421 on a guitar cabinet. Because the 421 is so bright when it's right in the middle. it encourages you not to overly go crazy on the treble. Although having said that, I have kind of done that. I might do a video at some point on how impulse responses are made in their own right. 2Notes' zone version is a little different, and that's the bit I'm not really allowed to talk about. But how to make an impulse response is public knowledge. It's something that I've been doing for 10 years or more, is trying to make my own impulse responses. It was only in the last few years that I really got the techniques right. I got, you know, the room and the microphones and everything that you need to make it sound right. So yeah, anyway, that dark big boy Neo with the 421, which is actually quieter, put them together. How about that? So you've got one that's very dark but that holds the low mids down, and one that gives you all that top end detail. In fact, that one on its own, it's kind of Fight for Your Right to Party by the Beastie Boys. It's that ratty sound. We add in the Neo with the 57. What a monster. So that's going on the left side. And on the right side, I decided that I did want a dual rectifier after all. But only the one. So what I've done... And, interestingly, I didn't use an 808 Tube Screamer in front of it because I didn't feel like this song needed it. It's not like a gent track or anything like that, and the guitars weren't tightly palm muted enough for that to work, so I needed a lower gain sound. So here's something that's really interesting. So I'm using a dual rectifier, and it sounds... I'm just going to make sure it's panned centrally. It sounds like this. Now that's got some guts. So what I've done, firstly with the dual rectifier here, I've changed the rectifier to the tube rectifier because I just happen to like on this song, because the chugging the palm mutes isn't the tightest, the tube rectifiers just give it a full thump that the solid state just didn't quite do. And I'm using the red channel on Modern, which is the brightest, heaviest, most nu metal channel, essentially. But the gain's backed off to 4. So the gain, it's got a lot of gain stages, but not much gains going through each, which is how you end up with that and not this. And with the higher gain, that might sound great on its own, but if I was to put that into context, you wouldn't be able to pick out a single note. If I put this back there, and then we'll talk about the cabs, you can hear... You can hear every chord there. So here's another one that's... this cabinet is one that I've only just captured. This is the vintage PA. I'll turn off the big beast for a second. So that's a classic G12H greenback. The speakers in this cabinet are 40 years old. But the microphone that I've picked here is an SE Electronics SE5 small diaphragm condenser of all things. I think what I tend to do is I'll have a sound in mind, whether it's kind of mid-scooped or whether it's kind of ratty and mid-focused, and then I'll flick through the microphones until one appeals to my ear. And in this case, it was the SE5 because the dual rectifier amp's already adding a load of the low end and a load of the top end, and I just wanted something that was relatively neutral, and the SE5 is relatively neutral. I mean, it's no Neumann KM184, but it's neutral enough for what I wanted it for. And then the Big Beast is the other one, but that's got a U87 on it, which dead center is quite kind of ratty and in your face, but it's not got the fizzing top that the 421 did, which I didn't want because the dual rectifier already has too much, if anything, of that fizzy top end. I didn't want to bring that out, whereas the JCM 800 doesn't have as much of that. So on the JCM 800 side, that was fine to add that. So if I add these two cabs together, we get... Yeah, so you notice I've got no EQ, exciter, compression or anything going on yet. I'm going to be making some presets for wall of sound for my cabinets very soon. And I'm going to be adding things like the EQ and the compression as needed. When I'm doing my own workflow, like to use the EQs and compressors from the Slate Digital stuff. But if I was to load these into something like the Torpedo Studio and use them live, I would definitely use the features that are on board here for ease of use. Now, if I pan this to the right and then turn the other one on, press play. Sounds pretty big to me. I might turn up that left channel a little. Now, they do sound tonally different. I think I'm okay with that. I might put a bit of an EQ on the left one just to bring a bit of brightness out, just to make them slightly more tonally matched. But a lot of my favourite metal bands have different amps on either side. And it's something that I've kind of come to terms with, that I used to, in my mind, always be like, right, no, they have to be perfectly the same. It has to be the same amp, same everything. And I'm finding that I'll just unsolo these, play these in context of the mix. Having different amps on different sides is no bad thing. So I'm going to add... What am I going to use? I'm going to use the custom EQ on this left guitar just to bring a bit of top out. Now let's just compare that to the original mix for a second. Where it arguably sounds big, but you can't make out what's going on. Is it mono on the stream? Oh, it shouldn't be. That would be because for some stupid reason, XSplit was set to copy from one side to the other. Ah, XSplit, you pain. Can you hear me in stereo now? One, two, 1, 2. There we go. How about that? Technical issues, gotta love them. I could have sworn I tested all this before, but it's another thing to add to the checklist is make sure it's stereo. Right, okay, so now you can hear me in stereo. Good. So it was all XSplit's fault. So we're comparing that to this is the original mix. So that sounds like kind of a behemoth, but you can't pick out what's going on. No, it's good. If there's any issues like that, do feel free to say. We've now been streaming for an hour and a half almost, and no one said anything about not being able to hear in stereo. So hopefully all the points have still been getting across absolutely fine. And apart from the panning we've just talked about, I can't hear. Well, let's listen to a bit more of this original mix then. Now you can hear it in stereo. This is what I was talking about before, with it taking forever to get to this bit. So now we'll compare that to this. Right, so I think we're getting somewhere, because we've got, what was it again? We've got a JCM 800 on one side and a dual rectifier on the other side, and it's in need of a bit of a mix, but everything's clear, everything's... Now my mic's off. 1 2 1 2. Mic is definitely not off. 1 2. 1 2 1 2. I can hear myself on stream, so if you can't hear me on stream now, then that's something on your side. Yeah. Okay. Right, so anyway, yeah. Doesn't matter, it's fine. So I'm gonna put all 4 of these guitars in a group. I'm going to keep the ones I'm not using, and there's a reason for that. Reason being that I'm going to probably use one of the remaining guitars in the choruses. So let's just go to a mix group. So let's firstly use virtual tape machine on 16-inch just to get a bit of saturation going. So let's go to virtual mix rack, everybody's favorite mix rack. So the first thing we're going to do is use a trimmer just to bring the input volume down a little. Because we're going to be sweetening things, which is going to bring the level back up, and it's going to get too loud. So, oh, the output's just starting to hit the red, which is interesting because it wasn't before, but as we've added more and more layers, I've accidentally kind of crept up and up and up and up. This is what happens, you see. So let's bring in the Hollywood with some saturation and really saturate this, because that saturation is going to make for more high-end harmonic enhancement. And we're going to bring in a bit of a high pass just to get rid of any subsonics that might be there. And let's just see about maybe using Revival to bring a bit of that metal top end in. It's not really doing anything because there isn't much in the way of top end. Let's try the Neve top shelf, because that should drag some of the stuff up. So if this signal dies at 12 kilohertz, even with a 10k Neve shelf, that should pull everything down to about 1 or 2k, gently up with it. Like that. And I've also then just pushed a little bit of the mids out, just a bit, because I'm probably going to bring the level down a little more now. So I'm just bringing in little bits of elements that I like about the guitar sound, but little bits. If you go too far, the guitar sound becomes a caricature of itself. You end up with this kind of fizzy, ratty thing that doesn't sit in the mix. So whenever I feel like it sounds nice, I've probably gone too far, so I'll go back a little bit. Sounds like a monster now. Right, so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this middle guitar, which I think, if I remember rightly, yeah, so I used an SM57 and an 87, which is a fairly standard combination on the big beast, with a dual rectifier, but with the bass way down. It was on spongy mode with the tubes. And what this is going to do is this is only going to come in on the chorus. So let's just find the choruses. Okay, so that's where the guitar solo is, so we don't want it there. So if we select that and the verse and all this stuff here, and then we go to F2 and we can just mute it all, so that's gone. So now what we can do is listen to what this does when we go from the verse to the chorus. Nice. And then let's hear it drop out again. It's all about light and shade at this point. Now that we've got the basic stock sounds, we want to start adding in sections and taking away in sections. Ah. Right, so that's where it actually comes back in. Now, one of those guitar parts was wrong, and I think it was the left one. Well, that right part there was wrong, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of it and add a replacement guitar in. What? Okay, so that guitar's wrong as well. Hopefully this one's right. Well, either that or it's the left one that was wrong. Hmm. No, they're alright up to that point. So it's the left one that's completely... Ugh. So what happens if I put that up there and then unmute that? Right, so it's... let's get rid of that one instead. This is something that should really have been done at the time, but bad engineer, bad engineer. Okay, so we now have the right part being played. That's a good plus. So that middle guitar fills in that middle space only on the choruses where there's no chugging, and we want fullness, where on the verses we want... let's just unsolo everything. So let's listen to the difference. Let's just bring in that on the right hand side, because if I remember rightly that was a feature. So did you hear how that middle guitar there just made it sound a little bigger? But if I'll just try and add that into this part here, just so you can see how it doesn't help on this chugging part. It's not helping, whereas if I turn that off... Oh, what did I do? Right, so this is where we'll now look at this guitar lead, because that's something that's been elephant in the room. So what did I use for the cab here? So I just copied over... I used the big beast with an SM57 on one side and an Audix i5 on the other side, which is kind of like an SM57, but the kind of mid spike is a little higher up, which means it's a bit clearer sounding rather than... I find it quite useful for like secondary channels, and you know, for snares as well. It brings out a real natural airiness on snares that I like. So I've got a little bit of room reverb and compression going on one of these mics, so it's almost like parallel compression, and it's not doing much. And so this whole first bit is not going to be used. That's awful. So that can just go. So what I'm doing is there are little bits here, and I'm using a Mesa Mark II-C Plus as the head. The bass is almost off and the treble's cranked, but the gain is on 10. That seems ridiculous, but the way that a Mark II-C Plus was designed, a lot of guys would use them with the gain absolutely dimed because they weren't really made with like metal guys in mind. So a lot of guys like Metallica, early Dream Theater, would use these on 10 for the lead tones, and the EQ, the 5-band EQ's on with kind of the classic V dip with an extra top push. When I did the original mix, did I use red wires? I might have. I might have just... No, I would have used God's Cab. God's Cab's an oversized Mesa rectifier, which at the time I thought was the thing, but turns out that, you know, recto cabs, they sound great on their own, but trying to get them to work in a mix can be difficult depending on the amp. So that's your classic Californian lead tone. Okay, so we have this lead part, which isn't a solo. That has to go. So this is one kind of mistake that I made in production at the time, was just allowing the guys to just put everything on. Any thoughts on the ASP800? I rely on the ASP800. It's my main preamp bank at the studio right now. I really like it. It's great value for the money, and it beats a lot of the preamps, the external preamps that I've used, where like vintage preamps will have background noise on them, the audience don't. The ASP880 I used had clever things, like kind of insert points, which I wasn't using because I tend to work like this in the box. Whereas the 800 had like the HMX and iron. The HMX I don't use much, but the iron I use on almost everything that I'm single tracking. It's just kind of a transformer warmth. Okay, so this is going to the delay channel, which I was saying earlier that I tend to set all my delays and things up, and I haven't done. Bad me. So I use Echo Boy for everything. It's one of the few things where I don't use the Slate bundle because I don't like the D16 repeats, or the sounds in it don't work for me. It's a personal thing. I've got a little extra money to buy Echo Boy with, for me, for a delay. Delays can make or break a mix, and for me, this is it. So the Memory Man on Ping Pong, probably on a quarter note because it's a really, really fast track, maybe even a half note because it's 180 BPM at this point, I believe. Yeah. So let's low cut it a bit. Yeah. So that's just... Right, so I've got an automation lane for the delay, it seems, where I've gone and done this in the past. Let's listen to this solo. So the solo is where I've used the same lead sound. I might have to not do that now. I might have to duplicate this track and make it so that one is the lead and one is the the solo. Would I consider doing export the Reaper projects so people can measure? Depends. If I can get permission from the bands, well, a lot of the bands that I do these things with no longer exist. That's kind of why I use them as my project base, because, you know, it's purely educational. If I can get permission, I may well put them out. But then, of course, if I release these in the format that I work with, I will inevitably get people going, oh, well, this doesn't work for me, this plugin doesn't work for me, this doesn't work for me, and that suddenly will reflect as if it's my fault. So, I'll see what I can do. Let's have a listen to this. Ah, that volume spike should be before the note, not during it. Right, what I think I'm going to do is there is a channel here called Wah. I'm going to just duplicate this guitar lead channel. I'm going to mute one for now. I'm going to mute the other one. Yeah, so there we go. I'm going to call this one guitar solo. And I'm going to work with these as separate tracks. So what I'm going to do is I've got this whole thing. I'll just turn the mixer off for a second. So that's the solo. So I'm going to get rid of all of this. And then I'm going to get rid of the solo on that track. There we go. So that's now the guitar solo and that's a lead thing. And I should always have done that separately. Again, because I'm going to treat them sonically differently. They fit in different places in a mix. A solo should be quite a vocal sound, where a lead part, it's more of a kind of a fill-in background sound than a lead sound, to be honest. So it should really be treated very differently. So anyway, there's this wah because we had a foot controller, a MIDI foot controller that was controlling the wah in Amplitude. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to bring that wah back. Let's bring up Amplitude, turn everything off, bypass, 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 bypass. We don't want none of your stinking cabinets. And let's see, filter wah, that'll do. And so that's going wah wah. If I assign MIDI learn wah and hit play, look at it go! Look at it go! So that magical MIDI controls the wah right there. I'm going to turn the output down on that a little. Actually, I'm going to turn the output volume back up because that peaking was making the amp do interesting things. Sounds pretty cool to me. So, what I want to do now is mix. Because that sounds to me like a decent lead sound, but it doesn't quite fit the mix. So this is where Mix Rack comes in. So we want to make it a little bit brighter, but not nasty. I'll probably want to scoop out a lot of the low end with FGS. Make it a little brighter. There's a kind of a low mid richness, which is nice, but for a solo tone, we probably want to take that right down. So I'm going to find that with the green sweep. There. Right, so I'm going to keep increasing the top end, and I'm probably going to use digital EQ to notch out some of that nastiness up there. Because this is kind of roughly the way that I think you would do it for a Metallica Black Album-y kind of sound. Ooh. let's just use a bit of that custom series boost and roll the top off with the low pass filter. Take it down a bit more. Kirk Hammett, you have a lot to answer for, my man. Now, I've just realised that that's gotten way too piercing and way too loud, and the reason I can notice that is that underneath that solo, the drums are starting to sound fairly lost and everything, but as soon as I turned it off, everything sounded good again. So the problem is the solo tone. So let's turn it down and then slowly bring it back up and see if that fixes it. Okay, so that notch there is definitely helping. Let's do something a little crazy. Let's try Joey Sturgis's gain reduction. And just make sure the gain comes down. Because this slams things like solos, but can really help them sit in a mix. Nice. Right, so as soon as I hit gain reduction, it sat nicely, but I could hear a low mid kind of honkiness. So then I pulled up the digital EQ, found it, and it sat better. Cool. So that's much lower volume than it was before, but it sits nicely. Let's just look at mix rack and just stick a trimmer in there and just take a little level off, because I don't want this to be clipping on the way out. And then I'll just push the volume on your side so you can still hear it fine. Let's just take that volume down with automation before that. Minus 180. Yeah, cool. Interesting thing about those guitars at this point is they've still not got any amps on them. Okay, Okay, let's just cut those guitars there as well because they're overlapping. Okay, so things are starting to sound like they should. What headphones are these? These are Sennheiser's HD 650s. These have been my trusty headphones for years and years and years. They're, look at them, they're rusty. That's just the casings that's rusty, don't worry. That's just because they've been bashing around in my bag for years. I do have a much nicer, prettier pair still in the box, but I pretty much just leave those still in the box because I know these headphones so well. So the snare could do with sounding massive and doesn't, so that's where I'm going to bring in a snare verb. And this is a Chris Lord-Alge trick, so I'm going to bring in another copy of Verb Suite Classics on another channel. Hello? Hopefully. The whole thing isn't locking up on me. When was the last time I saved? Oh, I saved less than a minute ago. Hello. This is highly unusual. Reverb is technically still running. Showing you all my private messages. Don't want to be doing that. It's one of those things. This never happened before. Open back headphones, yes, they are open back headphones. I don't believe that you can mix on closed back headphones because the pressure levels with the closing and the forcing the sound into your ears. I used to think that everything sounded a semitone higher when I had high volume closed back headphones on. Not that you should be mixing at high volume, that's not my point. But it messes with your ears and your mind and is generally just not good. Right, so where was I at? That's right, so snare verb, the solo and the EQ and everything's all still there. This is because I religiously hit with my little finger and my first finger, Control S, save, 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 save. And I've now saved so many times that I rarely ever, if there's ever a crash, which is relatively rare in Reaper compared to any other DAW I've used, I just don't lose anything. Right, was it the 6,000? No. 2,000? One of these, and my memory is failing me right now. 2016? Yeah, 2000 Reverb D, the CLA snare. This, the Chris Lord-Alge snare with a filter after it, is a Magic snare embiggener. It sounds weird, but I need more attack on those toms. Oh, maybe a bit less. Just have another quick listen to those snares. I might need to add in something that's got a real crack. Not what I was thinking. The pearl brass. Try it with a Ludwig. Yeah! That's something you very definitely can't do in real drum world. So I'm going to use a bit of JST clip on this snare just to give it a bit more crack and a bit more level. Cool. I've not even put anything on that bass to mix it yet. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of low end using the custom series lift. And a bit of presence there. Really hear that bass note coming through right down the center. And if you think that's too much, go back and listen to the Black album and you'll be surprised just how much that bass jumps out at you right down the center. And then when it's in context you go, whoa, without the bass giving that note down the middle, those guitars sound hollow. Isn't that amazing just how much of that low end that you think is in the guitars is actually the bass? So, moving on. What have we got left? So, the guitar solo, let's just make sure one more time that that sounds right and fits. Just taking a bit of low end out of that snare just because now it's a little bit too thuddy. So I'm just using a filter for the first time on the snare just to take some of that out of it, just so that the crack comes through more. I think we're starting to get there. So let's have another look at this lead guitar. So let's just get rid of all this volume automation, get rid of that. Just clear the lane. Go. Be gone. what I don't want to do with this is... Oh, what's that? Oh, send volume for delay is more on the choruses. Right, that makes sense at least, because this is... Yeah. We want this to be quite dry, but I want it to sit in its own space that isn't the vocal space. With the vocal space being kind of 1K center mono. The guitar, I want this to be not completely left and right either. I want to use kind of a stereo effect, but not go overboard. There's one in Reaper called NBA Pseudo Stereo, and I'm going to use it here. Let's see how that fits with the rhythm group. Pan-wise, that makes it fit, but mix-wise, it's in trouble. What I want to do with this then is I want to bring out some of that biting top and really cut the low end so that I can pick it out, but it's not interfering too much. Let's use FGS for this. So the low end is gone. That's really interfering with the mix now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and take the gain down on this so it's a less high gain sound. Right, I'm going to change the cabinet on this because it's now separate from the solo. It doesn't need to have that creamy, rich, low mid. So let's have a listen to this on its own, just the lead. And maybe just use a 4-2-1. I said 4-2-1, excuse me, sir. Right in the centre. Bit of overload on. Maybe a bit further away. Let's get the distance. Yeah, by adding a bit of room in there, it's become quite 80s. It sounds quite, you know, Def Leppard-y, Queensryche-y, but it should sit in the mix properly, and because I've linked them pan left and right, that should sit in a space much better. Right. Ugh. That can go as well. All those parts where the lead was doubling the rhythm and just making it sound worse, it's gone. There's a mid-tone in... There's a mid-tone in there I do not like, so I'm just going to try and find it and get rid. Right, now there's all this high frequency information going. The drums, the close mics are coming out, but the rest of them aren't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see what happens if I pull the pin out of this grenade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a compressor called the Monster on the whole drum group. And what the Monster does, it's like an 1176 compressor with all the buttons in. Smash, kill, death. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the mix of this on 0% and I'm going to slowly add a bit in. And what that should do is around the close mic transients, it should bring in a bit of a wash of the cymbals, the tom ring, the snare ring. It should bring character out back into the mix now that we've got kind of a lot of information masking that. I want to bring it back out. Don't know if that's doing enough. Let's hold down shift and really smash it. That's kind of the thing I'm looking for. Doesn't seem to be doing it, so I'm going to try another Sound Toys plugin that I've had for a long time, and that is Devil Lock. So Devil Lock Deluxe, if I just crush and crunch things a bit with a bit of darkness and then have the mix at 0 and then do a similar kind of thing. So right at the climax of the song there, it's really getting full. A lot's going on. So let's go back and just make sure that when it kicks in, that's another thing I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of that stupid ride part at the start. The drummer always wanted to keep that. It's gone. Sorry. I'll probably be keeping very little of this clean guitar when I actually amp it and stick it with the delay and everything. Let's see what happens if I just get rid of those. What happens if I just put one kick underneath that snare? Yes, there we go. So that's how that should start, really. Give it a big Lars Ulrich, a big... Now that we're using Devil Lock, it's really bringing out that honk. So let's get rid of that low mid in the overheads. get rid of a bit of the super low end in the overheads and see if that cleared up. Okay, good sign that I needed to turn my snare down a tiny touch was that the bus compressor was really jolting on the snares. Okay, so one thing I'm not going to do then in this stream is go through and melodyne the vocals. Melodyne's on there, it's transferred. The vocals will not be perfect intonation-wise, but I don't want to spend all night doing that kind of thing and boring you to death. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the London preamp on the main vocal, just to add a bit of character. It's the one that distorts the least, and this girl was really dynamic. If you look at the waveforms on some of this, let's just commit this to take. You see how massive some of these swells are. If I just solo this. Okay, I'm going to turn off that delay for now while we work. It's pretty, but it's not helping. So what we're going to do first is use FG Stress, the one that everybody was waiting for. We're going to use it in 6/1. Oh, hello. Come on. More tech issues. Yay. Come on. Power supply for this laptop that I'm working on's been a bit dicky recently. Come on. Now is not the time to be doing this. Rock solid for a week and then breaks during stream. Just my luck. Alright, stop. If anyone has any funny stories about their equipment breaking mid-stream, now's a good time. Come on, make your mind up and actually work. Right, that'll do. Okay, so, anyway, moving on. So we're at 6/1. I'm going to use the high pass on the audio and the filter. Going to put distortion 2 on because when she really belts it, I want it to feel louder but not necessarily be louder. And a good way to do that is to add harmonic saturation. Not necessarily to the point of outright distortion, but one of the reasons that classic 1176s make vocals sound massive. Problem with digital compressors is when you absolutely belt a note and it hits the compressor, it sounds quieter because that fundamental note has been squashed. What classic hardware compressors do is they saturate as well as compress, so it sounds perceivably louder without actually being louder. So that's why classic compressors sit in the mix without necessarily not doing their job. It's a tricky line. Anyway. This button here as well is going to be an absolute lifesaver, because what this does is when she hits a big power note, that's going to be up in this detector range, and what that's going to do is that's going to keep everything nice and level and not suddenly either pierce our ears or go the other way and make it dip out the mix. Here at 6:1 compression, it goes into the red compressing there, and it just sounds even. So the compression is largely taken care of now. What we need to do now is EQ sculpt. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with the CS EQ, because there's a lot of low end in this that we don't want. That wasn't harsh enough, so what I'm going to try is FGS, which is a bit more of a cut at the bottom. There's just way too much low end in that vocal. But it's more of a 200 hertzy. A clip. Actually clipped on recording. Didn't notice that at the time. Bad engineer.
Their hands are turning, they don't know what to do. Guess who? My wonderland isn't like yours. Guess who? My wonderland isn't like yours.
Take. Oh, I took the takes away. Let's just see what if this one sounds any better.
Oh, my wonderland is. Oh.
Well, let's just stick with them as they are.
My wonderland isn't like yours, baby. So hold on to it.
Let's just
don't try to tell me
really crank up the attack speed. Is the attack speed, not the attack in milliseconds here, and slow the release down on this compressor to really nail it to the wall.
Baby, so hold on to it. Don't try to tell me that I'm insane, 'cause I already know. Baby, so hold on to it. Baby,
Come on, brain.
hold on to it.
Yeah, so it was fast attack, slow release. Oh, no. That way. And then with these buttons in.
Baby, so hold on.
Let's see how that sounds in a mix. Let's now bring that through a second compressor, but with the Circuit 2, which is an opto style compressor. I think we're getting there. There's definitely going to be a de-esser needed now.
Can you imagine tearing the world apart? 'Cause that's exactly what you did. And what if I'm the one who doesn't know what to do? Well, it's true. No wonderland doesn't make us baby. So hold on to it. Don't try to tell me that I'm insane, 'cause I already know. The time's safe in my own mind. I'm not gonna keep on falling down.
Something that I do like to do with vocals is really drive them at the end through the virtual channel on the SSL. It just makes them sit a bit more popularly for me, if you will.
Have you ever thought you could lose?
Let's use, well, that's definitely going to need some volume automation. Let's use a couple of notches here, because there's a bit I can hear more clearly separately here.
Have you ever thought you?
300 hertz-ish. That real low fundamental is really strong.
Have you ever?
Let's go back and knock a bit off this boost. Where was it? That one?
Have you ever thought?
And see if, is it the CSEQ that's going to be a much sweeter high frequency breath lift? Yeah. Just add another notch. I can still hear a bit of muddiness down here somewhere.
Ever thought you just couldn't take it anymore?
Just gonna add the low end back in here so it's not got a radio effect that SSLs can quite often have.
Have you ever thought you could lose your mind?
Okay, and that definitely needs volume automations. I'm going to turn off that Melodyne because it's not being used. And let's not forget about these clean guitars because they don't have any amps on them right now. So let's send them to the plate in the delay. Lots. Oh. No, I didn't want to send it with an automated delay. And what amp do I want to use for this? One of the Thermionics, probably a Fender. No, let's use a diesel, but unclean. I do like diesel cleans, they're just super clean. There we go. Those faders seem off, but if we look at the meters in the user areas, we can hear that the levels needed matching either way. This is actually not using a cab. Huh. So let's just use a compressor on this. 1176 modern. Just to... Hello? With a high pass side chain on. Just to keep it level. That's all I need on that. Nothing excessive. Let's turn the guitar volume up as well. So. And let's bring those vocals down a touch more. Cool. On reflection of hearing that first bit, the highs in the drums and the guitars were a little hyped. Okay, so there's a double vocal there, and all I did was I copied across all the settings we had. I'll make sure that's a little quieter, it's -6 dB. I put that pseudo stereo on it to make it pop out the sides, because it is just a reinforcement part. And I'm going to go in and hammer the compressor on this backing vocal, just to make sure it really does sit behind and not take over, especially on that big note there. I've been looking at vocal tuning software, Waves Tune or Melodyne. I've never been comfortable with Wave Tune's system. It's always been a massive pain in the backside for me. It's never quite worked right. Melodyne Assistant I would recommend very much. Melodyne Assistant is the second level. Yeah, yes, thank you. You may want to auto-tune a little. I already covered this. That I said I'm not going to spend the time doing that on this stream because that's not what this stream's about. I could spend 2 hours getting the Melodyne right. How's auto-tune supposed to know what key that some of these notes are supposed to be in? It may make it better, it may make it worse. You know what, sod it, let's do it. Auto-tune. Right, so we're in D minor, which is F major for the Aeolian mode. So let's throw that in at the start and do that on all the backing vocals as well. Oh, oh, that was weird. All of this is getting me off track. This guitar lead part, as soon as I turn that off, suddenly the whole mix sat, which means that part is either got to go or has got to go a lot further down. Maybe why it was inaudible in the original mix. That's got to go way down. So now the interesting thing here is that I'm not turning it down by a prescribed amount. I'm turning it down by the amount that I hear that I need to make it sit. Because I'm using less distortion on the rhythm guitars and generally just less gain, less distortion, even less EQing on the rhythm guitars, they naturally sit. I can turn this lead part way down and it's got a space. Not too bad with a bit of auto-tune actually. So, not perfect, but again, not the point of this exercise. So let's go back to the original and just listen to that section here. So the low end's not as flubby this time. We need to work on the vocals a little more. Oh yeah, they've not got any EQ or anything on them. Let's scoop the low end out of that. My wonderland isn't like yours, baby. Let's have another look at that. Needs even less low end. Yep, that needs to go right down to the bare bones. That's a good note. That needs to be louder. That can shine through. Right, so what I'm going to do is, now that I've taken the low end out of it, I'm going to, before that low end, nail it to the wall with a vintage 1176. So now I can bring the volume up, and I'm going to use a bit of that MDA pseudo stereo trick from earlier, which is essentially a comb filter with a delay on one side that just takes a mono source out of the middle. It's not something I would recommend ever for a lead part, a main instrument, but if it's something that's just filling out a little bit of space as a cool effect, you can hear how that's gone, that high vocal's gone from this to this. That's a good way, if you use that on a main vocal, to cause massive problems in a mix, because as much as it sounds cool, when you kind of collapse it down to mono, it doesn't work very well. But as a cool effect, like I say, the worst that can happen is with it on a backing vocal is that backing vocal isn't as prominent in a mono collapse, which isn't as big a deal. So that can come down a little, and then that is that copied each time? It is, so that needs to go pitch shifted down and reap with the F2 button by half a semitone. Let's listen to that. Close enough. Gonna nail that with an 1176 as well. I'm gonna use the MDA pseudo stereo here, and I'm gonna switch it round so that it goes into the opposite left and right, so we don't get a build up of the comb filtering on one side. It's not too dissimilar from what guys used to do in the 80s with using like two Eventide H910 harmonizers, one that was slightly sharp and one that was slightly flat, and they would flutter, and the fluttering created a comb filtering effect and made for massive stereo sounds.
Oh, my wonderland isn't like yours, baby. So hold on to it. Don't try to tell me that I'm insane, 'cause I already...
Right, so there's an extra little bit in each chorus there that needs bumping up because we can't hear it.
Insane, 'cause I already know.
Which then makes it a harmony instead of a single part. So, yay automation. And then the little blue lines that come up on the screen when I automate mean that I can see from automating that if I make the lines match, it's the same level every time.
Insane, 'cause I already know.
Never did DS. Let's DS the whole thing as a group. Let's do DS a stereo. And if I've still got it. Oh, I've not got the Waves DSer on here. That's surprising. I could have sworn I had the Waves DSer. That's on the studio computer. I'll have to sort that out. But yeah, let's go to DSer, classic DSing, vocal bus, no, singing, female singing smooth split. Let's see what this does.
I'm insane, 'cause I already know.
Yeah. Not a big fan of some of these presets.
Have you ever thought you could lose your mind? Roll my tears, scream the peculiar man. Hearts in the style dance. Their hands are turning, they don't know what to do.
Turn the sensitivity way down. It fem for with a DFer.
Roll my tears, scream the peculiar man. Hearts in the style dance. Their hands are turning, they don't know what to do. Guess who
There we go. That should do it. I do like with DS's to not use them unless necessary, so that's why I've got the sensitivity backed off and the auto up here, because what that does is it just lets through gentle S's, because I quite like sibilance to a point on a vocal. As soon as it sounds like an aerosol and it's quite painful, then it's got to go, but I don't like FFFFF vocals where it's kind of it's very early 2000s, very overdone.
Roll my tears, scream the peculiar man, hiding my style and cheeks. Their hands are turning, they don't know what to do. Roll my tears, scream the peculiar man, hiding my style and cheeks. Their hands are turning, they don't know what to do. Guess who? Right when the land is awake, baby. So hold on to it.
Okay, so the Eosis DS, which again comes with the Slate Everything bundle, is just taking care of some of the more harsh S's there. Which is, of course, what we want. Now, we're pretty much there in terms of the overall mix, so we've got automation and arrangement to look at, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this 5.5 minute behemoth, hopefully, into about a 3.5 minute radio friendly track, because that's, I think, the audience this is going for. I mean, it doesn't kick in as a song for 1:20. It's, if this was on an album as like a 1:20 opener and then from where it kicks in was track 2, fine, because then 1 is conceptually the intro to the album, but it doesn't leave you, interested.
Have you ever thought?
Right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just cut the guitars here. They don't cut there. Great. Let's just cut them there and put the start here. See if that cuts a couple of bars out.
Have you ever thought you could lose your mind?
Right, so I'm going to go 1, 2. So I'm going to get rid of all of this, because that's 37 seconds that can just go. It's a little harsh, I know, but in the interests of brevity, let's just extend them out, bring out these noises. Oh, no. Yep, so is that the right part? Nope. Yep. Let's drag that out. See, this is where arrangement can really change a track. So if we go. Oops. So. That's where it should have cut from. So that should be. And that was where the original guitar was, which is another reason why I kept them. So if I just plop that down there and unmute it, it's always good to have backups of all your sections. I think one thing I'm going to do here is, I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm going to just fade it in. Okay, and we're going to go to the middle section. Right, so that middle "have you ever" can go. Da 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 da. So that's where it's going to come in for the drums. Let's see what happens if I just cut there. Oh no, too much. There. So if we cut that much out, this is like old tape splicing to do single edits. Yeah, so it's not perfect, but and if that's the end there, let's get rid of this. Wow, wow. And see where that leaves us time-wise, because that could just be a straight fade out. So that's gone from 5.5 minutes to 4 minutes, under 4 minutes, no, just 4 minutes 5. So by being kind of ruthless and merciless with the arrangement, I've taken it from an album track to a single edit. Right, so onto the volume automation, because that vocal there seems a little loud. I don't really want to be pushing the guitars up yet, but I don't want the vocal to be that much louder. Maybe I do, in that section before it, want to have the guitars quite a bit louder, because they're the feature. then push the vocals up at that little junction there because they're not getting through. Not by that much. So we definitely want a boost on the rhythm guitar there. And then what I'm going to do for the last line of the chorus is I'm just going to push those rhythm guitars up a bit. And for the next section as well, but let's just get to that in a minute. So I want to just push a couple of dB on the guitars there. Right, so I want to have a little bit more oomph on that first guitar note. So what you may or may not notice that I did there is that I did a little bump on the start of the guitars. I'm just going to leave that in place for that first note. So I'm trying to boost interesting parts on the guitar, or parts where I feel like the song needs a touch more energy but not go overboard. So take the vocal group down for the chorus. It doesn't need to be much louder. One thing I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to make that doubled vocal that only appears on the choruses brighter. And what that's going to do is that's going to lift the choruses and no other sections without automation. Let's just take that big note on the main vocal down a little because it doesn't need to be that loud with the other three backing it up. Back up a bit. Extra guitar. That last vocal line falling down is a lot softer, and even though we've slapped on 2 compressors, it still needs a push. Still feel like something in Virtual Mix Rack could help us cut through. Air might be the one.
Keep on falling down.
That's the one. Because air is so high as an EQ band that should just make it sit without being high mid nasty. That's really what we don't want. Just making that kick a little bit more stereotypical metal kick. Good old virtual tape machine. It's great for that kind of pretend tape that just gives it that low-end saturation-y thing. Now, I think we're getting to the end of what I'm going to do here, because I could spend a good couple of hours now going through and automating parts, but hopefully I've shown you the idea there of what I would do to push little interesting things and just dip down little bits that are interfering, and shown you a lot of my bag tricks as per usual. So there's a lot of that virtual mix rack going on. The drums are now sounding like a beast. There's that. I might get a bit of that, bit less of that going on. But if anyone's got any questions, now is the time, because we're not going to be on stream that much longer. There's a thought. On those big crashy parts at the end of the chorus, I'm going to bump the overheads. Hello? So I'm going to make sure the overheads hit there, and then I want them to end at the end of that crash, so I'm just going to give them a tail there. So let's just see how much I can bump that. See if that's too much. It probably is. Yeah, that's suddenly filling up the whole space, so I just want a couple of dB of just push on the overheads and the guitars to suddenly give it a Well, if there's no questions coming in, then I think that is going to be it for today. I'm going to be releasing a video on Monday that's comparing the Celestion G12M greenback with the G12H greenback. Wednesday is going to be guitar and tech news, I believe, which is going to be covering lots of the stuff that's coming out at NAMM as much as possible. And then Friday is going to be another live stream. I've finally got the iPad working with the capture stuff, if the capture card will actually hold out. Do you add a dB or two in a chorus on a master track? On the master track, no. I think it's far too obvious. I will add a dB or two in places on a chorus on separate instruments that could do with a boost, but I don't just overall put the level up because I find it's noticeable and it's quite unsettling. Even the human ear is quite sensitive. A decibel on the entire thing is easily noticed, whereas if you've got something in the mix that is kind of the bass line, as it were, like my example usually is the bass guitar and the close mics on the drums. If you push a couple of items like the rhythm guitars, maybe the vocals if they need it, and the overhead mics, just push them by a dB or two, you get the effect you were after without unsettling people, because then when you come back down, there are parts of the mix that are at the same level they always were, so you've got a kind of an audible familiarity with it, so you don't end up getting upset audibly, not upset as in crying baby upset, but as in, it doesn't feel wrong. One of my favourite examples of this is Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters, a lot of their stuff, the Echo, Silence, Patience and Grace album's a good example, where all the choruses just slam the guitars that bit harder, and then the guitars come right back down, but the vocals don't really go anywhere. I mean, that's an album that's really heavily compressed and limited, and there's nowhere left to go. So the only way, you couldn't just push the entire mix a bit more, you have to push an element, because if you push the rest of the mix, you just end up with a distorted mush. Which is an interesting thought, that the highest this mix got on my meters then was -2.2. Was the loudest at that point. I think -2 is roughly the loudest this mix gets, and that's not got a limiter on it. It's got bus compression, but if you look at them again, absolutely full tilt at the heaviest, loudest part of the mix. That's not even hitting 3 dB. One of Stephen Slate's personal mix tips, which I've done a couple of times, is to have a compressor on your heavy guitar bus that's not doing anything. It's just at that point where it's not compressing, and then on your choruses push the rhythm guitar into that compressor so it just has a bit more chunkiness but isn't necessarily compressing really. Anyway, any more questions? If not, that's it for today, because it's gone 11 PM here and I'm starting to get, and I'm back in the studio tomorrow to get more cabinets captured for 2 Notes for a new series that I'm doing, and also to finish off a video which is where I'm doing serial versus parallel wiring in guitar cabinets and whether it makes an audible difference. Spoiler, it does, which surprised me, but how much difference and what difference it is, we'll have to wait until the video is ready, which should only be a couple of weeks. But I've got to actually finish filming it and then edit it, and I've got a couple of promo videos to do for 2 Notes, and I've got an entire album to mix and master in the next couple of weeks, and lots to do. So, anywho, that's me for today. So, thank you everybody for tuning in. And if you're watching this on catch up after it's been released live, then apologies for the technical issues at the beginning. And it always seems to happen. We check everything. We check everything is right. We play it back. It's right. And then you hit go live. And everything falls apart. It's like a clown car. But we will fix more and more as we go. that's the problem with live videos. When you're editing them, you can edit that out. But never mind. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this, check out our Patreon. If you can spare $1 a month to help us out, it doesn't sound like a lot, but aside from the studio work that we do, if we want to do more and more of these videos for you, we need to be able to, set the time aside. Now we've got to keep the lights on somehow. So if you would consider looking at our Patreon, patreon.com/hoppolstudios, we would be very appreciative. And if not, just tell other people about it. Tell other people about the channel, tell other people about the videos that we're doing, because that's the other big thing. So, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the next video. Well, goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.